Sector Anaxis, 924.M37. A Salamander sergeant named Vell of the 2nd Company walks into a forward operating base where a Carcharodon detachment has been refitting for 9 days. He has never seen Carcharodons before. He stares at the nearest one, at the sclerae black to the edge of the visible white, at the gene C degradation visible in the jaw and the teeth, at the carapace armor older than the chapter is supposed to be. He logs the encounter in his personal vox. The recording survives. In it, he says, "These are not Astartes. These are something older than Astartes." Vell was correct. That recording does not exist in any open Imperial archive. The encounter does not exist in any open Imperial archive. Sector Anaxis itself appears in no battle ledger you can request from the Adeptus Administratum. And yet the Carcharodons were there, in M37, 10 centuries before the Badab War would compel the Forge World scribes to write them down for the first time. That is the pattern.
Wherever you look for the Carcharodons in the open record, you find a silence the exact shape of a chapter. Their founding date is uncertain. Their parent legion is alleged. Their gene seed is described in Imperial Armour Volume 10 as unusually pure, which is to say, not Raven Guard at all. Their chapter master's age is not on file. Their lightning claws are older than the chapter is supposed to be. Their chief librarian is, by the Forge World text's own admission, only 3 generations removed from the original exiles, and the original exiles, in the Forge World text's own framing, sailed for the outer dark while the Emperor still walked among mortals. Hold those last 20 words for a moment. They are not mine. They are quoted from Imperial Armour Volume 10, Badab War Part 2, published by Forge World in 2010, which is the only canonical primary text the Imperium has ever produced for the Carcharodons Astra. Before that book, they existed in fragments.
After that book, they existed as a question. And the question this video answers, the question Sergeant Vell asked into a Vox channel he was not authorized to open, is the one the Imperium has been very, very careful never to ask in writing. What if the Carcharodons are not the orphans of a Raven Guard exile? What if they are the operational survival of the 2nd Legion itself, redeployed at Unification's end, scrubbed from the founding rolls, and sent to the outer dark with a chapter name no High Lord can pin to a Primarch? The case is not the case of a single document. It is the case of 1,000 small refusals to commit, arranged in a row. Begin with the published record. Imperial Armour Volume 10 introduces the Carcharodons Astra to the Badab War in 910 M41, when their fleet materializes on the edge of the Golgothan wastes, unlooked for, without astropathic warning, without Mechanicus transponder ping, without a marker on any chart either the Loyalist or the secessionist forces had been keeping. They are formally Loyalist. Their first captain, Tyberos the Red Wake, opens cooperation with the Inquisitor Legate prosecuting the war, and with Lord Commander Carcharodon of the Red Scorpions, who holds overall command of the Loyalist Astartes contingent. The Carcharodons are deployed first to the Endymion Cluster, where the secessionist Mantis warriors are operating out of feral and feudal recruitment worlds, and they systematically annihilate planets known to have given the Mantis warriors shelter. By 913 M41, they are on Badab Primaris itself, sabotaging the ancient atomic and geothermal reactors that power the renegade Astral Claws planetary defense batteries. Forge World's narrators describe the Carcharodons' conduct in this campaign as savage, methodical, and uncompromising. The Imperium accepts the cooperation and takes the win. After Badab, the chapter is granted permission to recruit from the Maelstrom Zone's feral worlds.
Then they vanish back into the outer dark, and the next reliable imperial record of them comes long enough later that the original signatories of the cooperation orders are dust. That is the published record. Now, look at what the published record refuses to say. It refuses to give the chapter a founding number. Imperial Armour Volume 10 itself frames the Carcharodons as alleged to be either an ancient chapter born as early as the second founding, or a relatively new chapter raised during the 23rd founding. Lexicanum, summarizing the published canon, says outright, "The exact origins of this infamous chapter are hard to pinpoint in imperial archives, as the Carcharodons have left no records of their activities in recent history. They feature nowhere within the open imperial records, and likewise the chapter has no officially recorded battle honors. A chapter that is either 2 centuries old or 10,000 years old, with no battle honors on file and no founding number anyone in the Imperium has signed off on, is not a chapter the Imperium is comfortable describing. It is a chapter the Imperium has decided not to describe. There is a difference. Now, consider the anomalies. Each on its own is a curiosity. Stacked, they are an argument. The first anomaly is the body. Carcharodons display pale white skin and black eyes with the sclerae filled black to the visible edge. The most venerable have eyes that are liquid black entirely, with no iris and no sclera at all. Imperial Armour Volume 10's description of Tyberos when he removes his helmet, and he very rarely does, is quoted verbatim, "A corpse-white nightmare with half the bones of the face exposed in a bloodless grimace, while his eyes are a soulless, depthless black." Now, the casual reader will assume this is Raven Guard mutation. The Raven Guard suffer from a published gene seed defect, the ash blind, the sable brand, that yields black eyes and a combat blindness episode. The Carcharodons suffer from something they themselves call the blindness. The two conditions look the same. They sound the same. Surely they are the same. But Imperial Armour Volume 10 explicitly refuses that conclusion. The Carcharodon's gene seed, the Forge World text says, is unusually pure, stable.
The dark eyes, in the Forge World text's own framing, are unlikely to be the result of mutation. Read that sentence again. The published canonical source on the Carcharodons looks at the symptom that everyone assumes is Raven Guard and says, "This is not Raven Guard." Then it offers no alternative explanation. Then it stops talking about it. That is not silence. That is a footnote written by someone who knows. The second anomaly is the weapons. Tyberos wields a pair of lightning claw gauntlets named Hunger and Slake, heavy, gauntlet-mounted devices that combine power blades with an inner maw of adamantium chain teeth. Imperial Armour Volume 10 describes them as ancient relics. The Forge World text records, again verbatim, that there are whispers within the chapter that this pair of ancient lightning claws once belonged to the Raven Guard Legion's 18th chapter, though their exact origins remain mysterious. Whispers within the chapter. Origins remain mysterious. Stop on those phrases. The chapter master of an Astartes chapter is using weapons that the chapter itself cannot date and cannot source, that predate the chapter's claimed founding by whichever founding number you happen to accept, and the published canon refuses to commit on where they came from. They are older than the chapter. The chapter's master is using them. The chapter does not know why. The third anomaly is the chief librarian. Tekahurangi, called the Pale Nomad, is, by Imperial Armour Volume 10's own admission, only 3 generations removed from the original exiles. 3 Astartes generations is not a long time when the Astartes you are counting live for centuries. 3 Astartes generations from the original exiles, if we are honest about what the words mean,
puts the original exiles within reach of being remembered by men who still draw breath in the chapter today. That is not a chapter founded a few centuries ago.
That is a chapter whose oral tradition reaches back into a deep, recorded silence, back to a first day of exile that the chapter itself preserves as canonical memory, and the Imperium has chosen, for 10,000 years, not to enter into the open ledger. The fourth anomaly is the doctrine. The Carcharodons follow the nomad predation pattern, an operational doctrine that, in Imperial Armour Volume 10's own framing, evolved for Astartes formations operating beyond the Imperium's boundaries for extended periods, entirely self-contained, and able to sustain itself without any Imperial support whatsoever. That is not how a chapter founded in M36 from regular gene stock learns to fight. That is how a Legion-era formation that was already at the edge of the map when the gene banks were sealed continues to fight. Nomad predation is the doctrine of a force that does not need the Imperium because it predates the version of the Imperium that builds supply lines. The fifth anomaly is the refusal of standard reinforcement.
The Carcharodons do not draw from the Adeptus Mechanicus's standard supply chains. They do not request the Codex pattern resupply allocations a Raven Guard successor would be entitled to. They do not file battle honors in the form required to receive replacement gene seed from the apothecarian. They take what they need on the way, from the recruitment worlds of the Maelstrom Zone, from the relics of dead chapters they encounter in the Outer Dark, from the contested holds of the secessionist worlds they cross. In the Imperial Armour Volume 10 account of their Badab campaign, they accept Mechanicus replenishment only minimally, only as the campaign forces them to, and only on the Inquisitor Legate's direct intercession. The chapter does not want to be on the ledger. The chapter wants to be left alone. And the Imperium, and this is the part that should land hardest, the Imperium lets them. The sixth anomaly is the rotation.
The Carcharodons disappear into the Maelstrom for decades, then re-emerge. The canonical record records the disappearances and the re-emergences, and treats the duration as the chapter's prerogative. The channel's prior video, the Cryo Vault Thesis, posited that the Maelstrom is not random frontier defense territory, but a specifically chosen rotation, that the chapter is rotating its companies through a duty the Imperium has not authorized the Imperium to know about. The published canon does not confirm a cryo vault. The published canon does confirm the rotation, and confirms that the rotation is not explained. If the cryo vault thesis is right, the rotation is what wardens do. If the cryo vault thesis is wrong, the rotation is still the rotation of a chapter that has been doing the same circuit since before the Imperium's chartists arrived to map it. The seventh anomaly is the chapter master. Tyberos the Red Wake holds 2 ranks. The chapter only barely allows to be held by one man, master of the chapter and master of the first company. He commands the Red Brethren personally. He commands the battle barge Nicor personally. He commands the chapter personally. He has been doing this for as long as the published record records the chapter as having a chapter master. The Forge World text and the Black Library novels by Robbie McNiven, Red Tive, 2017, set on the prison colony Zartak, and Outer Dark, 2018, set on Piety 5. Both treat Tyberos as already ancient, already mythic, already the singular memory of the chapter. Neither text gives him an age, neither text gives him an induction date. Black Library and Forge World on this one point observe a discipline that they observe nowhere else in the Astartes catalog. They simply will not say how old this man is, and the record is fragmentary. The chapter records, the published canon explicitly says, are fragmentary.
Tyberos' age cannot be directly verified from any open source. Accounts diverge. But here is what is strange. The chapter's own titles, Shade Lord for the chapter master, Pale Nomad for the chief librarian, are the titles of Terran exiles named in the early Great Crusade. Shade Lord was the title used by Arcus Fall, an exiled Raven Guard commander expelled before the Horus Heresy. Pale Nomads was a cognomen used by the Luna Wolves for the Terran exiles of the early Great Crusade era. The Carcharodons preserve both titles as living offices. They preserve them as the chapter's own. They preserve them with the exact spelling and the exact role assignment, in unbroken continuity, 10,000 years after the Imperium decided to stop talking about those exiles in writing. A chapter founded in M36 from regular Raven Guard stock does not know those titles. A chapter that was there when those titles were used does. So, 8 anomalies, and we have not even reached the Legion question yet.
The Legion question is the second half of the case. To make it, we have to look at what the canon actually says about the second. The second Legion has no recorded name. Its Primarch has no recorded name. Its records were subject to an edict of obliteration. The High Gothic phrase is damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Magnus the Red has confirmed in canon that the Emperor personally purged the 2 lost Primarchs and their legions from the Imperial record. The Imperium's official position is that both 2 and 11 were expunged, every record removed, every monument struck, by the Emperor's direct order. The official position is also that the disposition of the Astartes themselves is unrecorded. They are simply gone from the open ledger. But the canon is not silent about what happened. The canon is silent about what was authorized. There is a difference. Around the time the 2nd and 11th legions were expunged, the Ultramarines legion swelled in Astartes numbers to eclipse all other legions. The widely cited and now broadly accepted reading is that the surviving Astartes of the 2nd and 11th legions were redistributed, primarily into the Ultramarines, which is what accounts for the Ultramarines' unusual Great Crusade and Heresy-era numbers. Robute Guilliman inherited the gene stock. The gene stock survived the heresy. At the second founding, in the years following the Siege of Terra in mid-014.M31, Guilliman codified the redistribution into the Codex Astartes and divided the Ultramarines many times. The Genesis chapter, the first ever Ultramarine successor founded. The Aurora chapter, which inherited the existing armored formations of the Ultramarines' 4th chapter and became the master of the lightning-fast armored assault. The Inceptor lineage, confirmed primogenitor chapter. The Apocrypha of Scaros records that the Ultramarines sired 23 primogenitor chapters, but it omits to name them all. That is the published record on the 2nd Legion's gene stock. What the published record does not say is what happened to the operational veterans. You have to ask the question carefully because the canon will reward you with silence if you do. Gene stock is the biological capacity to make more Astartes from harvested progenoid glands. Veterans are men, trained, indoctrinated, oathed, scarred, named men whose voices had been heard by their Primarch, whose doctrine had been written by him before the records were burned, whose carapace armor bore the heraldry of a legion the Imperium had decided to never speak of again. Belisarius' Call confirmed in canon in M42 that he had access to 2 and 11 gene stocks. He experimented with them for Primaris creation, and Guilliman refused widespread use. So the gene stock survived for 10,000 years, separately accounted for in the Imperium's most carefully sealed reserves. Fine, that is the canon.
But the veterans are not in those reserves. Gene stock does not have a face. Veterans do. And the question the canon will not answer is, where did the faces go? If you were Robute Guilliman in the years immediately following the siege of Terra, and you had a problem on your hands, a legion of operational veterans whose Primarch the Emperor had personally erased, whose name you were forbidden to speak, who had trained as a legion under a Primarch whose doctrine was already heretical, and whom you could not formally fold into the Ultramarines without explaining who their Primarch had been. What would you do? You could not kill them. They had not done anything to be killed for. You could not keep them. They were a political grenade.
You could not put them in the Codex Astartes standard chapters, because the founding roles of those chapters would have to be signed and the lineage would have to be specified. There is only one solution. You redeploy them. You give them a new name. You scrub the lineage. You put them on a ship and you point them at the outer dark. You forbid investigation. And you tell the Adeptus Terra that you will handle the bookkeeping personally, that they can keep the gene stock for the official chapters and you will keep the actual men on the actual ships with their actual chapter master in the actual outer dark, where no High Lord will ever have to file a question about them. That is what the canon's silence describes. That is the chapter the Carcharodons fit perfectly. Consider the doctrinal fingerprint, because doctrine is the thing the Imperium could not bring itself to throw away. A legion is not just a number of armored men.
A legion is a specific way of fighting, refined over decades by a Primarch, taught down from veteran to initiate as ritual and reflex. When you redistribute the gene stock, you preserve the biology. When you redistribute the men, you preserve the doctrine, the muscle memory, the formations, the void tactics, the boarding cadence, the patience. The Aurora chapter, after the redistribution, becomes the master of the lightning-fast armored assault. That is the Aurora doctrine. The Genesis chapter, after the redistribution, becomes dogmatically loyal to Guilliman and the memory of the Primarch they are now told they have. That is the Genesis doctrine. The Inceptor lineage becomes its own thing. None of those three doctrinal fingerprints look like nomad predation. None of them look like void-haunted self-sufficiency, 20-year deployments without resupply, the cold patience of a fleet that does not require a homeworld.
If the Second Legion's operational doctrine had been redistributed into Aurora and Genesis and Inceptor, you would see the doctrinal echo in those chapters. You do not. The doctrine went elsewhere. The doctrine went where the men went. And the doctrine went, in the published record, into precisely one place. The chapter that fights with the doctrine of a Legion-era void formation, that refuses Imperial resupply, that rotates entire companies into deep warp territory for decades at a time, that maintains its own oral history of a first day of exile and a forgotten one whose name is preserved in living memory but not on paper, is the chapter in the outer dark. That is the Carcharodons. There is no other candidate. There is no other chapter on the Imperial Register that fits the doctrinal fingerprint of a legion that was supposed to no longer exist. And then there is Tyberos.
The audience-flagged hypothesis is that Tyberos the Red Wake is older than any chapter master should be, that the man wearing the dreadnought armor and wielding the chain-toothed lightning claws on the bridge of the Nicor is the unbroken transmission line of the doctrine, not the Primarch. The brief is careful on this point, and the script will be careful on this point. The hypothesis is not that Tyberos is a Primarch. The hypothesis is that Tyberos is the longest-serving senior Astartes in the chapter's continuity, that he has been the master since the chapter was hidden, and that he has not let go. The record is fragmentary. The canon will not give us his age. What the canon will give us is the dreadnought armor modified to a giant's stature, the lightning claws older than the chapter is supposed to be, the chief librarian 3 generations from the original exiles, the dreadnought designated Wandering Ancestor, Itako. And you can hear the framing in that name, can you not? The framing of dreadnoughts not as honored dead, but as ancestors, plural, returning. The Carcharodons preserve their oldest minds in walking sarcophagi and call them ancestors. Wandering Ancestor Itako, as Black Library introduces him in Outer Dark, is presented as a dreadnought who fought before the chapter as currently constituted existed. The chapter does not pretend otherwise. The chapter, in its own internal language, knows its ancestors fought in a different formation under a different name. The chapter does not say which, but it preserves them. It rotates them. It feeds the line forward, and Tyberos rotates with them.
What nobody mentions is that the Carcharodons' burial culture, the part of the chapter the Black Library novels work hardest to depict, is not the burial culture of a Raven Guard successor. The Raven Guard inter their honored dead in the Ravenspire's catacombs on Lycius's moon. The Carcharodons do not have catacombs. They do not have a fortress monastery. They have the Nicor, and they have the lesser battle barges, and they have the void around the Nicor, and they have the dreadnoughts that walk the decks under names that are the chapter's most carefully preserved property. Robbie McNiven's 2 Black Library novels, Red Tive, set in 2017's published Black Library catalog at the prison colony of Zartak, and Outer Dark, set in 2018 at Piety 5 against the Tyrannid Hive Fleet. Both treat the dreadnoughts as venerated elders rather than as honored dead, which is the standard codex framing. Wandering Ancestor. Itako, the dreadnought McNiven introduces in Outer Dark, is presented in the narrative voice of the chapter as a being whose remembered words still bind the brothers around him. He is a continuity of voice. He is not a memorial. He is an active line back through the chapter's history to the men who taught the men who taught the men who taught the men currently walking the deck. The chapter, in its own ritual vocabulary, calls these dreadnoughts wandering ancestors because the chapter is not pretending that its institutional memory begins with its founding ledger. The chapter is openly telling you that its institutional memory begins earlier. The chapter is openly telling you that it has been wandering a long time. The chapter is openly telling you that the ancestors it walks among are not the ancestors of a Raven Guard successor founded in M36. Picture, then, the maelstrom rotation in that light. The chapter takes the Red Brethren, the First Company, the keepers of the oldest weapons and the oldest sergeants and the oldest dreadnoughts, and it disappears into the maelstrom zone for decades at a time. The maelstrom is the largest documented warp anomaly inside the Imperial sphere. It is the kind of region in which the chronicler Imperium loses track of you on purpose. The chapter goes in. The chapter comes out. The chapter does not explain. The channel's prior cryo-vault thesis posits that what the chapter is doing in there is warden duty, that there is something inside the maelstrom the chapter has been guarding since the chapter was hidden, and that Tyberos has been overseeing the rotation personally because nobody else in the chapter has been the chapter master long enough to know the route. The cryo-vault thesis is not canonical. It is the channel's reading of the silence. But the rotation is canonical. The duration is canonical. The chapter master's continuity is canonical, and the framing of the dreadnoughts as wandering ancestors is canonical. Read the 4 together, and the warden rotation reading is not strange. The warden rotation reading is the simplest available reading. Now consider what the Imperium gains by hiding all of this. It gains, first, a fully trained legion's worth of operational continuity that cannot be linked to a heretical Primarch. The Second's Primarch has been formally expunged.
The men who trained under him have not. If the operational veterans are still on the line in the outer dark, the Imperium retains every doctrinal advantage the Second's training gave them: the discipline, the rotation pattern, the voidcraft, the cold patience, without ever having to explain who taught them. Their oaths are to the Emperor. Their cosmology is to Rangu the Void Father and the Forgotten One. Whoever the Forgotten One was, the Forgotten One is gone. The chapter remains. The doctrine remains. The Imperium gets to use the doctrine and never has to say where it learned it. Take a step back and notice the structural argument. Every other Astartes chapter in the Imperial Register is on a list. Its parent legion is on a list. Its founding number is on a list. Its battle honors are on a list. Its homeworld is on a list. Its chapter master is on a list. Its chapter master is on a list. Its replenishment allocations are on a list. The Codex Astartes that Robute Guilliman wrote is a list. The reason it exists is that the Imperium learned the hard way, during the Horus Heresy, that Astartes formations whose disposition is not on a list become political grenades. Half the heresy is the story of what happens when legions cease to be auditable. Guilliman's response was to make every successor chapter auditable forever. Founding number, parent legion, gene seed lineage, fortress monastery, chapter master succession. On the list, on the list, on the list. The fact that the Carcharodons are not on any of those lists is not an oversight. The Codex Astartes does not have oversights. The Carcharodons are not on the list because the list could not be written without naming the Primarch they are not supposed to have. Their absence from the Codex's audit trail is the strongest single piece of evidence the script has, and it is hidden in plain sight, in a document everyone in the Imperium reads. It gains, second, a frontier warden with no political weight. The Carcharodons hold no system. They tithe no manufactorum. They have no homeworld of meaningful imperial value before the era Indomitus grant of Utheca. They cannot be courted by a faction in the High Lord's chamber because there is nothing to court. They cannot be threatened because there is nothing to threaten. They cannot be reformed because there is nothing to reform. A chapter with no founding number, no recorded battle honors, and no fixed homeworld is a chapter the Imperium can deploy or ignore without anyone noticing either way. That is what the Imperium needs in the outer dark. That is what the Imperium has. It gains, third, a chapter the Imperium can deny. The Edict of Exile in the Carcharodon's own cosmology prevents the chapter from returning until the Forgotten One returns. And the Forgotten One is, by definition, not returning, because the Emperor erased him. The chapter is therefore canonically permanent in the outer dark. The Imperium is canonically free to claim, if anyone asks too closely, that the Carcharodons are an aberrant fleet chapter of uncertain provenance, possibly Raven Guard, probably not its responsibility, doing the Emperor's work somewhere out beyond mapped space. The High Lords keep the gene stock for the official chapters. The operational veterans keep the line in the dark. Everyone is satisfied because nobody is on record. The chapter's official position, written into the Codex Astartes 9th edition's published Raven Guard successor lists, makes the case for you. The Raven Guard's published successors are the Black Guard, the Raptors, the Revilers, and the others. The Carcharodons are not on that list. The Codex itself, the document that Guilliman wrote, declines to commit to Raven Guard descent. That omission is not an accident. The Codex has reasons not to commit. The Codex is the document that established the redistribution of the Lost Legion's gene stock in the first place. If the Codex's author wrote the Carcharodons out of the Raven Guard successor list, and he did, It is because the Codex's author knew what the Carcharodons actually were and did not want to write that down. So we arrive at the case in its complete form. The case Sergeant Vell of the Salamander's Second Company would not have been able to articulate in 924.M37, but would have recognized the moment he stared at his first Carcharodon across that forward operating base. The chapter has no founding number anyone in the Imperium will sign. Its parent legion is officially alleged and officially not committed to by the Codex its parent legion's brother Primarch wrote. Its gene seed is unusually pure, which is to say, not Raven Guard. Its weapons predate its chapter. Its chief librarian is 3 generations from the original exiles, which is to say its founding is within living memory of men who remember it. Its doctrine is Legion Era. Its operational pattern is the pattern of a force that does not need the Imperium because it predates the version of the Imperium that builds supply lines. Its chapter master has held the line for as long as the chapter is recorded as having a chapter master.
Its dreadnoughts are wandering ancestors. Its cosmology names the Emperor as the Void Father, and its sire as the Forgotten One, whose name the chapter does not speak. And the only legion in canon whose disposition could account for all of that is the Second. The official record says the Second Legion's gene stock was given to Robute Guilliman, and Guilliman seeded the Ultramarines' Auroras, Genesises, and Inceptors with it. That story is true. It is also incomplete. The men who actually trained as the Second Legion, the veterans whose voices had been heard by their lost Primarch, whose doctrine had been written by him before the records were burned, those men were not in the Aurora founding ledger. They were not in the Genesis ledger. They were not in the Inceptor ledger. They were on a ship, in the outer dark, under a new name. They are still there. Their chapter master remembers the lost legion's name. He has never spoken it, and he never will.